Supreme Commander Threxall stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet rotate slowly in the void of space. And he felt the familiar thrill of conquest rising in his chest like a flame. The Vecthory Dominion had conquered 17 species across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, and every single one of them had fallen the same way. Not through military might alone, but through the simple power of fear. And Threxall had perfected this method over 200 years of warfare. The process was elegant in its cruelty, and it began with a single broadcast, a declaration of total annihilation sent to every communication device on the target world. And the message was always the same, a promise of complete destruction delivered with cold certainty. And every species before had crumbled within days of receiving it. The Kathmari had surrendered their entire fleet before Threxall fired a single shot. And the Varun had abandoned their colonies and fled into deep space, hoping to escape. And the Crystalline Collective had simply stopped responding to all communications and waited for death in silence. And this was the natural order of things, because fear was the oldest weapon in the universe and no species could resist it. Rexial's 4 eyes focused on the planet called Earth, and his tactical officers had spent months studying these creatures called humans. And the reports were encouraging because humans were soft and fragile with short lifespans, and they seemed to spend most of their time fighting each other over trivial matters. "Begin the transmission," Threxall commanded, and his voice echoed across the bridge with absolute authority. The communications officer activated the broadcast array, and Threxall's image was sent to every screen and device on Earth. And he spoke the words he had spoken 17 times before, the words that had broken entire civilizations, people of Earth. "I am Supreme Commander Threxall of the Vecthory Dominion, and I bring you the declaration of total annihilation. And your world has been marked for conquest, and your species has been marked for subjugation. And resistance is not merely futile, but meaningless. And you have 30 standard cycles to surrender your governments and your militaries and your will to fight. And failure to comply will result in the systematic destruction of your cities and your people and everything you have ever built. And this is not a negotiation, but a statement of fact. And your extinction begins now." Threxall ended the transmission and settled back into his command throne. And he waited for the familiar response, the panicked communications begging for mercy, the fractured governments turning on each other, the mass suicides and the riots, and the complete psychological collapse that always followed his waiting room had been prepared for the human delegates who would surely arrive within hours. Desperate and broken and ready to surrender everything, 6 hours passed, then 12, then 24. Tactical officer approached the command throne with visible confusion on his face, and his mandibles clicked nervously as he presented his report. "Supreme Commander, we are receiving transmissions from Earth, but they are not what we expected." Threxall straightened in his throne because this was unusual, and he commanded the officer to display the transmissions on the main screen. What appeared was beyond his comprehension. A human sat in front of a glowing screen, and behind him were strange lights and decorations. And he was speaking rapidly into a device while his hands moved across a control panel. And Threxall's translation software worked to interpret the words. Chat, you seeing this? The alien dude is literally declaring war, and his face looks like if a crab and a spider had a baby. Number offense to any Vecthory watching. Actually, full offense. Come get some, boys. The human was laughing. And more humans appeared in small boxes on his screen, and they were all laughing. And numbers climbed rapidly in the corner of the display. What is this? Threxall demanded. It appears to be some form of entertainment broadcast. Supreme Commander, and this human has been commenting on your declaration for several hours. And approximately 4 million other humans are watching him do so. Threxall's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. and he ordered the officer to show him other transmissions. The next display showed his declaration again. But something was wrong with it, because his voice had been altered to match a rhythmic musical beat, and his words had been cut and rearranged to create what the humans apparently called a song. And this song was being shared across their global network at an alarming rate. The Threx track, the humans were calling it. And they were dancing to it, and they were celebrating it. And they were treating his sacred declaration of war as entertainment. Another transmission showed humans gathering in large buildings, and they were watching his declaration on giant screens. And they were cheering as if watching some kind of sporting event, and they held signs with his face on them. And some of the signs said things like, "Welcome to Earth," and "Try us," and other phrases that the translation software struggled to interpret. Resil summoned his psychological warfare division, and the lead analyst arrived trembling because he had never seen anything like this. "Explain this to me," Threxal commanded. "Supreme Commander, the humans are experiencing elevated stress hormones as expected, but they are also experiencing elevated dopamine and endorphin levels, which are chemicals associated with pleasure and excitement. And this combination suggests that they are not afraid of us. Then what are they? They appear to be entertained. Supreme Commander, and more than entertained. They appear to be excited, as if our invasion is something they have been waiting for." Threxal rose from his throne, and his massive form cast shadows across the bridge. And for the first time in 200 years of conquest, he felt something unfamiliar crawling up his spine. And it took him several moments to identify the sensation uncertainty on Earth below. The humans continued their strange celebration, and betting pools were already forming on the outcome of the invasion. And merchandise was being designed, and content creators were preparing their equipment. And the entire planet seemed to vibrate with an energy that the Vectory had never encountered before. They were not afraid, they were ready, and somewhere in the back of his ancient mind, Supreme Commander Threxal began to wonder if the Dominion had finally made a terrible mistake. 3 weeks after the declaration of total annihilation, the Vectory Armada entered the Sol system with 12,000 warships arranged in perfect formation. And Supreme Commander Threxal expected to find a species in chaos, broken by fear and internal conflict and ready for conquest. What he found instead was something that made his 4 eyes twitch uncontrollably. The humans had organized themselves, but not in any way that the Vectory tactical manuals could explain, because they had not organized for defense or evacuation or surrender. And instead they had organized for something far more disturbing. They had organized for entertainment. Lieutenant Commander Yethka was the first to intercept the broadcasts, and she brought her findings to the Supreme Commander with her mandibles trembling so badly that she could barely speak. "Sir, the humans have established what they call betting pools, and these are systems where individuals wager resources on the outcomes of events. And they have created betting pools for our invasion." Threxal demanded to see the evidence. And what appeared on his screen defied all logic. A human website displayed odds and numbers in complex arrangements, and the translation software worked overtime to interpret the meaning. And what it revealed was madness, because humans were betting on everything. And they were betting on which city would be attacked first and which human general would achieve the most victories and which Vectory ship would be destroyed first, and even which Vectory commander would surrender first. The odds on first alien ship destroyed by civilian stood at 15 to 1, and thousands of humans had placed wagers on this outcome. "They are treating our invasion as a game," Yethka whispered, but it was worse than a game, because the humans had created something called a fantasy league. And in this system, humans selected teams of their own military commanders and earned points based on how those commanders performed in actual combat. And the point values were detailed and specific, with different amounts awarded for different achievements. 1 point for each Vectory soldier killed, 5 points for each vehicle destroyed, 20 points for each ship disabled, and 100 points for capturing a Vectory officer alive. Thrax, alive, felt his primary heart skip several beats as he realized what this meant. Because the humans were not just watching the war. They were participating in it through this strange system. And they had turned his invasion into a competition among themselves. The tactical officer interrupted with more disturbing news. Supreme Commander, we have intercepted what appears to be a professional broadcast. And I believe you need to see this. The main screen changed to show 2 humans sitting behind a curved desk. And they wore formal clothing and spoke with serious voices. But the content of their speech was insane. Welcome back to Invasion Watch, your #1 source for coverage of the Vectory conflict. And I am Marcus Chun here with my co-host Diana Reeves. And Diana, what are you seeing in the fleet movements today? Well, Marcus, the main Vectory armada has positioned itself near Jupiter's orbit. And based on their formation, we are predicting a 3-pronged approach toward Earth, with the primary thrust coming through the asteroid belt. And our analysts give humanity a 63% chance of stopping the first wave. 63%. That is higher than last week, and I assume that is because of the new orbital defense platforms coming online. Exactly, Marcus. And speaking of which, let us look at this week's play of the week. And this comes from cargo pilot Sarah Martinez, who made headlines when she rammed her transport vessel into a Vectory supply cruiser while live streaming the entire event. The screen showed footage from inside a human spacecraft, and a young human female was speaking rapidly into a camera while alarms blared around her. Okay, chat. This is it. This is the moment. Tell my mom I love her, and tell my ex-boyfriend he was wrong about me being reckless. 3, 2, 1, let us go. The cargo ship accelerated directly into the side of a Vectory cruiser, and the explosion filled the screen, and then somehow impossibly the footage continued, showing the human female floating in space inside an emergency pod. Alive and laughing. Did you see that? Did everyone see that? Someone clipped that. I need that clipped right now. Back in the studio. The 2 hosts were nodding with appreciation. Incredible footage. And we are happy to report that Sarah Martinez survived with minor injuries. And she has since gained 12 million followers on social media and has signed sponsorship deals with 3 major corporations. Threxall turned away from the screen because he could not watch anymore. And he summoned his senior advisors for an emergency council. Explain this to me, he commanded. And his voice shook with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. Explain how a species facing extinction can behave this way. The psychological warfare analyst stepped forward nervously. Supreme Commander, we have been studying human history and culture, and we have discovered that humans have a unique psychological trait. And they appear to process extreme stress through humor and competition and what they call entertainment. And this is not a weakness, but a survival mechanism that has evolved over millions of years. They should be terrified. They are terrified. Supreme Commander, but they are also excited. And in humans, these 2 emotions can exist simultaneously without contradiction. And this allows them to function at high levels even under extreme threat. Another advisor spoke up. There is more. Supreme Commander, and the humans have begun selling merchandise related to our invasion. And they are selling clothing with our images on them and toys, shaped like our ships, and even food products themed around the conflict. And their economy is not collapsing as expected, but instead appears to be growing. Threxall sat in silence for a long moment, and he thought about the 17 species he had conquered, and he thought about how easily they had broken under the weight of fear. And he realized that humans were something entirely different. They were not breaking, they were monetizing, and somewhere on Earth. A human child was wearing a t-shirt with Threxall's face on it. And the shirt said, "Final Boss" in large letters. And the child thought this was the funniest thing in the entire galaxy. Private Mikhail Volkov had never wanted to be famous. And before the invasion, he had been a simple infantry soldier stationed on Mars Colony 7. And he spent most of his time complaining about the food and playing video games in his bunk and calling his mother once a week. But the invasion changed everything. And Mikhail discovered that he had a talent he never knew existed. He was very good at killing aliens while talking to a camera. The battle for Mars Colony 7 began on a Tuesday, and Mikhail's unit was pinned down behind rubble in what used to be a shopping district. And plasma fire scorched the air above them while Vectory soldiers advanced from 3 directions. And by all normal measurements, this should have been a terrifying situation. Mikhail activated his helmet camera. "Okay, chat. We are in a bit of a situation here, and I have maybe 30 seconds before those crab boys push up on our position. So let me explain what I am thinking." His squad mates stared at him with confusion. But Mikhail ignored them and continued speaking to his invisible audience. "So the main group is coming from the north, and I count maybe 12 of them. And they are using standard suppression tactics, which means they are going to try to flank us from the east. But here's the thing, chat. I noticed that the building on our left has a structural weakness. And if I can get a grenade into that support column, the whole thing comes down on their flanking route." A plasma bolt exploded against the rubble near his head, and debris showered down on him. And Mikhail did not even flinch. "Okay, that was close. But we are fine. We are fine. Trust the process, chat." He pulled a grenade from his belt and calculated the angle in his head. And then he popped up from cover and threw with perfect precision. And the grenade sailed through a broken window and detonated against the support column. And the entire building collapsed in a cascade of concrete and steel, crushing the Vectory flanking force beneath tons of debris. "Let us go. Let us go. Did you see that? Someone clipped it right now." His viewer count had started at 0. And by the time the battle ended 3 hours later, it had reached 2 million. And humans across Earth and the surviving colonies were watching Private Mikhail Volkov fight for his life while providing commentary like it was a competitive video game. The Vectory Intelligence Division compiled a report on this phenomenon, and the conclusions were deeply troubling. Humans had developed a cultural framework where witnessing danger and surviving it generated something called social currency. And this social currency could be converted into actual resources through systems called sponsorships and donations and advertising revenue. And this meant that human soldiers were not just fighting for territory or ideology or survival. They were fighting for content. Report documented hundreds of similar cases. And human soldiers across all fronts had begun recording their combat experiences and broadcasting them to audiences. And the most successful of these broadcasts attracted millions of viewers and generated enormous amounts of resources. One infantry unit had a designated cameraman whose only job was to film the other soldiers during combat. And this cameraman was considered so valuable that the unit protected him more carefully than their own. Commanding officer, a tank crew, had installed multiple cameras inside their vehicle and broadcast their missions live. And their audience could vote on certain tactical decisions. And the crew would sometimes follow these suggestions, even when they contradicted official orders. A pilot had painted her kill count on the side of her fighter and updated it after every mission. And fans tracked her statistics and compared them to other pilots in elaborate ranking systems. But the most famous case was grandmother Elena Volkov, no relation to Mikhail, who lived in a suburb of Detroit and had never held a weapon in her 73 years of life, when a Vectory scout drone appeared over her neighborhood. Elena retrieved her late husband's hunting rifle from the closet, and she walked out onto her front porch. And she took aim at the drone hovering 200 meters above. Her granddaughter followed her with a phone held vertically. "Grandma, what are you doing?" "I am defending my home." Now be quiet. Elena fired once, and the shot missed. And the drone turned toward her with what might have been curiosity. She fired again. And this time the shot struck the drone's sensor array. And the machine wobbled in the air and tried to compensate. Her third shot hit the central rotor assembly. And the drone spiraled down and crashed into the street. And Elena lowered the rifle with a satisfied nod. "Grandma got one," her granddaughter screamed into the phone. "Grandma got one." The video received 30 million views in 4 hours. And Elena became a global celebrity overnight. And within a week, she had appeared on 12 talk shows and signed contracts with 2 firearms manufacturers and started her own line of merchandise, featuring the slogan, "Grandma Says Hello." The Vec-3 High Command watched these developments with growing horror, because they had conquered species that built great fleets and species that developed powerful weapons and species that fought with desperate courage. But they had never encountered a species that turned war itself into a form of mass. Entertainment Supreme Commander Threx Al received daily briefings on human content creation. And each briefing was worse than the last. And he began to understand that the humans were not just fighting his invasion, they were documenting it. They were analyzing it. They were making it entertaining for billions of their own kind. And the more entertaining the war became, the more motivated the humans seemed to fight it. Because every soldier was now a potential celebrity, and every battle was now a potential viral moment, and every death was now a potential legend. The Vec-3 had wanted to break the human spirit through fear. Instead, they had given humans the greatest content opportunity in their entire history. 6 months into the invasion, the Vec-3 war effort faced a crisis that had nothing to do with military defeats or supply shortages or strategic failures. Their soldiers were being recognized. Commander Crix Volume had led the assault on 2 human colonies, and his forces had killed thousands of humans and destroyed billions of credits worth of infrastructure. And by any reasonable measure, he should have been a figure of terror and hatred among the human population. Instead, he was a celebrity. The first sign came when Crix Volume intercepted a human transmission that featured his own image. And at first, they assumed it was some kind of wanted poster or target identification. But the translation software revealed something far stranger. Humans were debating his threat ranking on public forums. And they were comparing him to other Vec-3 commanders using elaborate scoring systems. And they were arguing about whether he was a better tactician than Commander Yetha Volume, or whether his kill count was inflated by the inclusion of civilian casualties. One human had created a detailed analysis of Crix Vol's command style, complete with graphics and statistics and predictions for his future behavior. And this analysis had been viewed by 3 million humans and had generated thousands of comments. Crix Volume is definitely a tier, one comment read. But he is not S tier because his fleet coordination is sloppy and he relies too much on overwhelming force. Another comment disagreed strongly. You are underrating him. His siege of Colony 4 was masterclass. He baited the human defenders into overextending and then crushed them with a pincer movement. That is big brain strategy. Crix Volume did not understand what A tier or S tier or big brain meant. But the tone of the discussion was unmistakable. The humans were evaluating him like he was a character in one of their entertainment programs. The situation worsened when Crix Volume discovered the merchandise. Because humans were selling clothing with his face printed on them. And they were selling figurines shaped like his body. And they were selling posters that featured dramatic artwork of him standing against a backdrop of flames and destruction. One shirt featured his face above the words. Crix Volume did nothing wrong, and the translation software struggled to explain why this was apparently humorous. But the most disturbing discovery was the fiction humans had written stories about him, and not stories about defeating him or escaping him or seeking revenge against him. but stories about him doing ordinary human activities. And some of these stories depicted him working in human food service establishments or attending human educational institutions or falling in love with human romantic partners. One story that had been shared thousands of times featured Crick's volume as a barista in a human coffee shop. And he struggled to understand human drink orders and developed feelings for a regular customer. And the story was categorized under something called enemies to lovers. Crick's volume reported these findings to Supreme Commander Threxall, and his voice carried a tremor that suggested deep psychological damage. "They do not hate us," Crick's volume said. "They have made us into entertainment, and I do not know which is worse." The psychological impact on Vectri troops was catastrophic, because soldiers who had trained their entire lives to inspire fear discovered that they instead inspired curiosity and amusement and even affection. And this contradiction broke something inside them. Human prisoners did not cower before their captors, and instead they asked questions about Vectri culture and biology, and some of them asked for autographs. And one captured pilot requested a photograph with his interrogator and explained that it was for something called the gram. The interrogator did not understand but allowed the photograph anyway, and the image was later transmitted to Earth somehow and received 10 million likes. Meanwhile, the human economy was not merely surviving but thriving, because corporations had discovered that war was extremely profitable when properly marketed. Defense contractors ran advertisements during invasion coverage, and the advertisements featured dramatic music and impressive visuals and slogans like, "When they come for your home," "Trust Raytheon," and Lockheed Martin, "Defending tomorrow today." Energy drink companies sponsored combat units, and soldiers would pause before missions to hold up cans and recite advertising slogans. And the audience responded positively to this because they found it amusing. A fast food chain announced that anyone with confirmed Vectri kills could receive free meals for life. And recruitment for the military increased by 40% within a week of this announcement. Ammunition manufacturers reported supply shortages, but not because of production problems, and the shortage existed because civilian demand had exploded. And humans who had never fired a weapon in their lives were purchasing firearms and ammunition to participate in what they called the content war. Some of these civilians formed informal militias, and they patrolled their neighborhoods looking for Vectri scouts and drones. And they broadcast their patrols live and competed with other neighborhoods for viewers and sponsorships. One suburb in Texas had its own morning show where residents discussed neighborhood defense strategies while drinking coffee. And the show had attracted corporate sponsors and generated enough revenue to fund additional weapons purchases. Supreme Commander Threxall sat in his command chamber and reviewed the economic reports. And the numbers made no sense because a species under existential threat should experience economic collapse. But human economic indicators were moving in the wrong direction. They have monetized their own extinction, his senior advisor said quietly. Threxall did not respond, and he simply stared at the reports and tried to understand how this was possible. And he began to suspect that the Dominion had fundamentally misunderstood what humans were. They were not prey, they were not even predators. They were something else entirely, something that the galaxy had never seen before. And Threxall was beginning to fear that he would never understand them no matter how long the war continued. 1 year after the declaration of total annihilation, Supreme Commander Threxall transmitted a message to Earth. And for the first time in his 200 years of conquest, the message was not a threat or a demand or a warning. It was a request: ceasefire negotiations. The word spread across the Vectri fleet like a disease, and soldiers who had never known defeat struggled to comprehend what was happening. And junior officers whispered in corridors about shame and dishonor and the end of everything they believed in. But Threxall understood what his soldiers did not. And he understood that the Dominion had lost this war the moment it began. And he understood that continuing to fight would only make things worse. The invasion had killed millions of humans, and it had destroyed colonies and cities and countless lives. And by any traditional measurement, the Vectri had achieved significant military success, but the humans did not measure success traditionally. Every Vectri victory had become content, and every human defeat had become a rallying cry. And every atrocity had been documented and analyzed and transformed into motivation for further resistance. And the humans were not weaker after a year of war. They were stronger. Their military had evolved at terrifying speed. And tactics that failed in the first month were replaced by tactics that succeeded in the second month. And weapons that proved ineffective were redesigned and improved. And soldiers who died became legends that inspired 10 more soldiers to take their place. The Dominion was fighting a species that learned from every loss and grew stronger from every setback. And this was not sustainable. And Threxal was old enough and wise enough to recognize when victory was impossible. The human delegation arrived at the negotiation station wearing merchandise of Threx. Al stared at them as they entered the chamber, and he saw t-shirts featuring Vectri memes and hats with alien-themed slogans, and one diplomat had a large tattoo on his forearm that depicted Threx Al's face in a stylized cartoonish form. They were smiling, and their body language suggested friendliness and relaxation. And they showed no signs of the hatred or fear or resentment that defeated species normally displayed. No hard feelings, big guy, the lead negotiator said. And he approached Threxal and slapped his thorax in a gesture that was apparently meant to be friendly. Hell of a show. Ratings were insane. You should see the documentaries they are already making. Threxal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and he struggled to formulate a response. And he realized that he did not understand what was happening. The Dominion had killed millions of their people, and the Dominion had destroyed 3 of their colonies. And the Dominion had committed acts that would be classified as atrocities by any civilized standard, and the humans wanted to discuss trade agreements. We are prepared to offer significant concessions, the lead negotiator continued. And he pulled out a tablet and began displaying charts and figures. We are thinking mutual non-aggression pact, obviously, but also cultural exchange programs and technology sharing and joint research initiatives. And honestly, we think this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. You want to be friends, Threxal said slowly, and his translation software conveyed his disbelief accurately. Why not? The war is over. No point holding grudges. And besides, your people are fascinating. Do you have any idea how popular Vectri culture has become on Earth? There are fan conventions and appreciation societies and cooking shows that try to recreate traditional Vectri cuisine. Threxal learned in that moment the horrible truth about humanity. And the truth was that they did not process trauma the way other species did. And they did not collapse under existential threat the way every other species in the Kalea galaxy collapsed. They adapted. They found ways to extract meaning from anything. And they found ways to extract profit from anything. And they found ways to transform even the darkest experiences into something that they could use and share and monetize joy. And horror existed in their psychology without contradiction. And fear and excitement occupied the same mental space. And this made them fundamentally incomprehensible to a species like the Vectri, who had evolved with clear emotional categories and predictable psychological responses. We have one condition, Threxal said finally, and his voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Name it. Your people must stop making content about us. The videos and the merchandise and the fiction, all of it must end. The human negotiator paused, and for the first time, his friendly expression flickered with something like uncertainty. That is a big ask. Freedom of expression is kind of important to us. But let me talk to my people and see what we can do. The negotiations continued for 3 days. And in the end, an agreement was reached, and the Vectory Dominion withdrew from human space with their remaining forces. And peace was declared. The humans agreed to stop making content about the Vectherthi were lying. Threx all knew they were lying even as they agreed. And he accepted the lie because he had no choice. And he understood that humans would continue to make content about his species until they found something more interesting to focus on. 3 months after the withdrawal, a book appeared on human bestseller lists. And the book was titled Threxall, Portrait of a Conqueror, and it was described as an authorized biography based on exclusive interviews. Threxall had never given any interviews, and he did not know who had written the book, but the royalty checks arrived anyway. And his financial advisor explained that he was entitled to a percentage of sales because the book used his name and likeness. The financial advisor was a human, and he had been assigned to Threxall as part of the cultural exchange program. And he seemed to find the entire situation amusing. "You are killing it," the financial advisor said while reviewing the sales figure, as Threxall did not understand the phrase. And he asked for clarification. "It means you are doing very well. The book is a huge success, and there is talk of a film adaptation. And honestly, your approval ratings among humans are higher than most human celebrities." Approval ratings among humans. Threxall, Supreme Commander of the Vectory Dominion, conqueror of 17 species, the most feared military leader in 3 spiral arms, had approval ratings among the species he had tried to exterminate. He thought about the 17 species he had conquered before, and he thought about how easily they had broken, and he thought about how they had surrendered and submitted and allowed themselves to be absorbed into the Dominion without resistance. And then he thought about the humans, who had turned his invasion into entertainment and his atrocities into content and his defeat into a business opportunity. And he realized that the galaxy would never be the same because the humans were out there now, and they were aware of the larger universe. And they were already making plans and content and merchandise for whatever came next. The Dominion had wanted to break humanity. Instead, they had introduced humanity to a much larger audience. Threxall looked at his royalty check one more time, and then he began to laugh. And the sound was strange and broken because Vectory were not designed for laughter. And his staff looked at him with concern because they had never seen the Supreme Commander behave this way. But Threxall could not stop laughing because he finally understood the joke. And the joke was that humanity had not survived the invasion. They had won it, and they had won it without even trying. Because winning was simply what humans did. And they did it so naturally that they barely noticed when it happened. The galaxy was in trouble, and somewhere on Earth, a content creator was already planning a video about it.